Sophia has already said that she wants to own and control her own masters. Well, Sophia, my dear, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if it's control of your music that you're looking for, if you sign a recording agreement containing a work made for hire provision, which by the way, they all do, then control is one of the things that you are definitely not going to get.
There's someone you should know.
Hey everybody, welcome to the BOM Podcast. BOM stands for Business of Music Bootcamp, which means that this is the place where we will drill down on the business and legal aspects of the music industry. Everything from copyrights and contracts to policies and practices. Whatever it takes to educate and empower you with the knowledge you need to make informed decisions about how to protect yourself and your music is what you'll find on the BOM. I'm your host, Professor Butler, and as a retired entertainment attorney, former record label executive, music law professor, and college administrator, I have counseled thousands of artists and musicians on the intricacies of the music business. Now it's your turn.
The information in this podcast is not intended, nor should it be construed as legal advice. If you have questions of a legal nature, we strongly recommend that you contact an attorney in your local jurisdiction who specializes in music and/or entertainment law. For guidance, check out our website at professorbutler.com and sign up to receive a free resource on how to find the right lawyer for you. And now, your host of the BOM Podcast, Professor Butler.
Hey everybody, welcome to the BOM Podcast, episode number 11. I'm your host, Professor Butler, and this week's episode is a follow-up to my last episode, where I broke down that all-important and often complicated concept known as work made for hire, also known as work for hire. Of course, if you haven't had a chance to listen to episode 10, don't worry, because I'll do a brief recap of what we learned to make it easy for you to understand and follow along. However, if you really want to understand work made for hire in its entirety, I encourage you to go back and take a listen to episode number 10, as there is lots of valuable information about the first way to create a work made for hire, which is when the work is created by an employee within the scope of their employment. This week's focus, however, is on the second way to create a work made for hire, which is when a work is created by an independent contractor or someone who has been ordered or commissioned to create the work when they are not and do not qualify as an employee. So first, let's recap. Let's go back to the letter I received from an artist and songwriter named Sophia. Sophia writes, "Dear Professor Butler, I am a songwriter based in Nashville, Tennessee. I usually write songs for up-and-coming country artists, but was recently offered the chance to write for a publishing company as an in-house songwriter. I'm really excited about the prospect of receiving a steady income and benefits. My goal is to build my brand and establish myself as a songwriter first, then maybe enter into a record deal as an artist." Her first question is, should I take the staff writer job or remain independent? Well, in response to Sophia's first question, I talked about the first way to create a work made for hire, which again is where the work was prepared by an employee within the scope of his or her employment. In this kind of work made for hire, the employer or other person for whom the work was prepared is considered the author and automatic copyright owner of the work, unless the parties have expressly agreed otherwise in a written agreement signed by both parties. In other words, if whatever you create was done so while you were an employee, and if what you created was done within the scope of your employment or as part of what you were hired to do, then your employer will automatically be the one to own your creation, not you. And according to the statute, your employer not only owns it, they created it, which means you have no rights in or to the work whatsoever. What this meant for Sophia was, if she took the job as a staff writer or a ghostwriter, as an employee of the publishing company, she would not own the song she wrote while in their employ. The publisher would own the songs as works for hire, which means that not only are they the owners of the songs, they are considered the authors of the songs as well. And as authors, they may or may not give Sophia credit for the songs she writes because under the law, she didn't write them. The publishing company did. Which also means that if she is trying to establish herself and build her brand as a songwriter, it won't help much if her name isn't being credited for the songs she writes. Now, just so you know, I spoke with an actual Nashville songwriter who said that the practice of hiring writers as staff writers has kind of gone out of style for many publishers. However, the staff writer or ghostwriting makes a great example of a time when a songwriter will not own what they write because they wrote it while an employee of the publishing company within the scope of their employment. All right, that was basically all, or should I say the short version of episode 10. Now let's go back to the letter I received from Sophia, but tweak it a little bit to fit this week's topic. Sophia writes, "Dear Professor Butler, I am also a singer-songwriter, writing my own songs and performing them in local clubs. I even make money as a session vocalist on the side. I recently attracted the attention of a record label that I've been singing for, and I'm considering entering into a record deal, but I really want to be able to own and control my own masters." Her question is, should I sign a record deal or remain independent? Sincerely, Sophia. All right. Admittedly, there are a few things going on here, but let's take the possible record deal first, because that's a scenario that many of you face on a regular basis. You've gone the independent route, but you have always wanted to be associated with and supported by a record company, a major record company in particular. And when I say supported, I mean with the bag, also known as money, for recording, marketing, you name it. So here you are in a situation where a label is finally interested in you, and you're asking yourself, should I sign or should I not sign? Well, this is another one of those topics that we will delve into in much more detail at a later date. But for now, the first thing you should determine when considering whether or not to enter into a record deal is, what do you want? What are your goals? You need to figure out why you want the record deal in the first place and what you expect to get out of it. Then make sure that the terms of that deal meet your needs. Sophia has already said she wants to own and control her own masters. Well, Sophia, my dear, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if it's control of your music that you're looking for, if you sign a recording agreement containing a work made for hire provision, which by the way, they all do, then control is one of the things you are definitely not going to get. And here's why. If you are not an employee, then you are basically an independent contractor, and independent contractors generally own what they create. Let's use a non-music example. You're about to perform live in concert, and you hire or commission a photographer to take pictures at your show. The photographer is not your employee, and that means that they are an independent contractor. And the photographs that he or she takes are original fixed expressions of an artistic nature, meaning that they are protected by copyright. The issue then becomes, who owns the photographs? Well, we learned in episode 10 that the person who created the work is considered the initial owner author of the work. In this case, that would be the photographer. The photographer created the photos by taking them with his or her camera. Therefore, the photographer is the creator, owner, author of the pics, not you. But what about the fact that you paid them to take the pictures at your show? Well, that's my point exactly. You didn't pay them for pictures. You paid them to take pictures. You basically paid for their services, not the product or outcome of their services. You paid for the photos to be taken, not the photos themselves. If you want to own the photos themselves, that will cost you extra. The only way you can automatically own those photos is if they were considered works made for hire. If the photographer were your employee, for example, there would be no issue. You would own the pics. But the photographer is an independent contractor that you hired this one time to perform this one task. So how can you own the work of an independent contractor? Well, in order for the work of an independent contractor to be considered a work made for hire, 3 things, really 4, but I'm combining 2 of them together. 3 things need to take place. First, the work must be specially ordered or commissioned, which basically means that they asked, ordered, commissioned, or hired you to create the work. And the work would not have been created had you not been asked, ordered, commissioned, or hired to create it. The work cannot have already existed. First comes the ask, then comes the work. And remember, whenever I say work, I'm referring to whatever original fixed expression or copyrightable expression that's being created. Either a musical work, which means a song, a sound recording, which are the masters, or in this case, photographs. Second, in order for the work of an independent contractor to be considered a work made for hire, there must be a written agreement signed by both parties that says that the work is a work made for hire. Unlike the employer-employee situations where work made for hire is automatic and doesn't really require a contract, it's very important that an independent contractor be informed and agree in writing that they will not own what they create and that they may not make any other money on what they create beyond the fee that they are being paid for that day. So like many of you, Sophia is a session vocalist. Basically, record labels, publishing companies, production companies, and even advertising agencies hire her to sing mostly background vocals on their demos, commercials, or other recorded projects. Whenever Sophia does one of these sessions, she always signs a 1-page contract. Sometimes it's not even a whole page. Sometimes it's just a paragraph, which might include some kind of name and likeness release, but will always include a work made for hire provision, which means that Sophia, when she sings in that studio, she will not own her vocal performance. Whoever hired her will own it. When she receives her upfront payment for singing or playing on a track, they are paying for her to sing. They are not necessarily paying for the proceeds or outcome of her singing, which may be copyrightable. Generally, the proceeds or outcome of her singing is the recording. So they're paying her to sing. They're not necessarily paying for the recording. Therefore, they need her to sign a work made for hire agreement that basically says that she does not own her own vocal performance and is not entitled to any revenue beyond her session fee. See how that works? That's why there must always be a signed written agreement that uses the term work made for hire in the agreement, explaining to you that you do not own whatever it is you just created in that studio. However, there is a third requirement for work made for hire. In order for the work of an independent contractor to be considered a work made for hire, and this is a part that very few people even know about, let alone understand, that the work you create, the work that you are being ordered or commissioned to create, must fit into one of 9 categories before it can be considered a work made for hire. Very few people know about the 9 categories. They know that the work has to be specially ordered or commissioned, and they know that there has to be a writing that says work made for hire. But they don't recognize that if the work does not fit into one of these 9 categories, I don't care how many work made for hire agreements you sign, if it's not on the list, it will not qualify as a work made for hire, meaning you will own whatever it is you create. So let's take a look at those 9 categories to see what kinds of works they include. And don't worry, I'm going to spend the rest of this episode breaking down each category and explaining how it applies to your work in the music industry. If the work you are being ordered or commissioned to create is part of a motion picture or audiovisual work, a translation, a supplementary work, a compilation, an instructional text, a test, answer material for a test, an atlas, or a contribution to a collective work, and there's a signed writing that says that the work is a work made for hire, then the work is a work made for hire, whereby whomever commissioned it is the one who owns it. Now, I know that was a lot. So I'm going to list those 9 categories again in a slightly different order, but this time honing in on the ones that you really need to know and understand. Once again, assuming there is a signed written contract that says that the work is a work made for hire, if you were specially ordered or commissioned to create any of the works that I'm about to name, those creations would automatically qualify as works made for hire. And I'll start with the easy ones first. Number 1, a test. If I were to hire one of you to write a quiz or a test based on the information provided in this podcast, something I'm actually considering doing, and you came up with the test questions, you would not own the test questions. You'd get whatever money or fee I paid you up front to write the test, but I would be the author of the test as a work made for hire. Number 2, answer material to a test. Same scenario, but this time, whether I write the test or you write the test, I ask you to write the answers to the test. You don't own those answers. I do as a work made for hire. Do you see how the underlying material, the test questions, and the answers to the test can all be considered kind of part of the same work? That's one of the reasons why they are considered a work made for hire. True, they are separate works, but because they are on this list, they're considered automatically to be works made for hire. Number 3, an instructional text. Now, an instructional text explains how to do or make something. It could be a book, a pamphlet, it could even be a recording, you name it, that tells you what kind of materials and equipment and tools you need and then how to put them together. They usually include things like recipes, directions and instructions for playing games, building models, assembling furniture, stuff like that. So, for example, whenever you buy something, especially something that needs to be put together or assembled, it comes with a little booklet or a pamphlet on how to use it and how to put it together. The person who writes the little booklet does not own the little booklet because it qualifies as a work made for hire. Number 4, an atlas. An atlas is basically just a collection of maps. They used to be traditionally bound in book form, but today they're mostly digital. If I hire you to draw a series of maps of various parts of the United States, and you draw those maps for me, you don't own those maps. I do, as works for hire. Is it starting to make sense now? Even though you were the one who spent days, weeks, even months drawing those maps, and I am the one who commissioned you to do so, and we have a signed written agreement that says that those maps are a work made for hire, And Atlas is one of the 9 categories that automatically qualifies as a work made for hire. I am the one who owns and legally authored those maps, not you. Number 5, a translation. Same principle. What if I hire you to translate this podcast into Spanish? You write and even record the Spanish translation. Under work made for hire, you would not own the Spanish translation. I would. I would probably pay you, and I may or may not give you credit, but that's all you get. Number 6, part of a motion picture or other audiovisual work. Now, this is where work made for hire starts to get a little tricky. First, the legal definition of an audiovisual work is a work consisting of a series of related images that are intrinsically intended to be shown by the use of machines or devices, together with any accompanying sounds. And a motion picture is an audiovisual work that consists of a series of related images that, when shown in succession, impart an impression of motion together with any accompanying sounds, if any. In other words, we're talking about a movie and a video, which means that if I hire you to create something that is to become part of my movie or my video, then whatever it is you create belongs to me. Now, this is really important for songwriters and composers, especially to understand. When you are ordered or commissioned to score a film, you do not own that score. The film or production company does. And just like for the other items on the list, it kind of makes sense. A motion picture or other audiovisual work is considered one work. The movie is one work. The video is one work, although they contain several elements. Once you make a movie and combine all of the necessary components, including the story, the script, the music, you can't later take them apart. If you write the score for a film, which basically underlies all of the images and action in that film, you can't later come along and say you want your music back. That doesn't make sense. Once the music is included in the film, it becomes part of the film, and there's no way to separate the two. Now, mind you, back in the day when I worked for MGM Music, there were times when we would seek to change the format of a film from its original theatrical version to DVD, but later discover that we did not own the DVD rights to some of the music, which meant that in order to release that film on DVD, we had to replace that music in the movie. Not an easy task, especially if it was used as background music behind dialogue, which may have all been recorded on the same track years ago. That's why whatever song or score that was written for that film has to belong to the film company, or else it could cause a whole mess of trouble down the line. Now, by contract, the film company can do whatever it wants as far as co-publishing, credit, royalties, etc. But for the most part, the score is theirs. And unless there is a perpetual license of some sort or other contract to the contrary, they can do whatever they want to do with that score. And we'll talk about that word perpetuity or perpetual, which means forever, in another episode. Which brings me to the last 3 things that are automatically considered works for hire according to the copyright statute. Number 7, a supplementary work. Now, supplementary work is a work prepared for publication as a secondary adjunct to a work by another author for the purpose of introducing, concluding, illustrating, explaining, revising, commenting upon, or assisting in the use of the other work. You see supplemental works a lot in the world of book publishing, things like the foreword to the book, the afterword, any pictorial illustrations, maps, charts, tables, editorial notes, things like that. Answer material to a test is basically a supplemental work. But it also includes things like bibliographies, appendices, indexes, and musical arrangements. Now, this does not refer to musical arrangements as the derivatives that they are. This refers to when you write a song and someone else is hired to create musical arrangements, let's say for choir, band, and orchestra. That musical arrangement is considered supplemental to the original work and is therefore a work made for hire. Didn't know that, did you? And finally, number 8 and number 9, I'll discuss together as they're similar and apply directly to why record companies will generally own your sound recordings. They will own your master recordings for the reasons I'm about to share. Number 8, a compilation. A compilation is a work formed by the collection and assembling of pre-existing material or data that are selected, coordinated, and arranged in such a way that the resulting work as a whole constitutes an original work of authorship. So let's say that you select, coordinate, and arrange a series of songs that are in the public domain, which basically means that the copyright expired, nobody owns them. And you put them all together in one songbook or one album. That songbook or album is considered a compilation, which means whomever ordered or commissioned you to select, coordinate, and arrange those songs, and arrange, in this case, refers to just putting them in a particular order. It is that person or entity, which is usually the record company or the production company, that owns the compilation, not you. More on that in a second, because similarly, number 9, a contribution to a collective work, is a work such as a periodical, anthology, encyclopedia, album, in which a number of copyrightable contributions, constituting separate and independent works in themselves, are assembled into a collective whole. Basically, a collective work is different from a compilation because a compilation is a collection of pre-existing material that may or not be protected by copyright, whereas a contribution to a collective work must be copyrightable and stand on its own as an original work of authorship. So why are these last two categories, a compilation and a contribution to a collective work, so important? It's because whenever you sign a recording agreement, the recording agreement is a contract in writing signed by both parties that says whatever you create under the agreement is a work made for hire. However, it's not really a work made for hire unless it fits one of the 9 categories I just described. And the 2 most commonly used categories in the music business, the 2 most commonly used categories to qualify something as a work made for hire are compilations and contributions to a collective work. I'm going to say that one more time because it's really, really important. You are not an employee of the record company. Rather, you're an independent contractor. The record company specially commissioned you to record that track or those tracks. You signed a recording agreement that said that anything you create will be considered a work made for hire, and the tracks you record will likely be combined with other tracks to create an album or an EP. Therefore, qualifying that album or EP as a compilation or a contribution to a collective work, automatically making it a work made for hire. This is why the artist almost never owns their master recordings. Every record contract I have ever seen in my 30 plus years in the music business was a work made for hire. Think of it like a motion picture or audiovisual work. The record label can't license the recording of your vocal performance, then 35 years later have you asked to take it back. That doesn't make sense. Once that performance is embodied on that record, it becomes a permanent part of that recording that the record company will own, not you. As a matter of fact, the record industry lobby wanted sound recordings to be listed as the 10th category of the statute, so that anytime you made a sound recording, it would automatically qualify as a work made for hire. This actually happened in 1999 in the first session of the 106th Congress, where the definition of a work made for hire under the U.S. Copyright Act was amended to include sound recordings among the categories eligible to be specially commissioned works. Now, that amendment was initially described as a technical correction, but proved to be really controversial as its impact was arguably substantive, meaning it was much more serious than a mere technicality. Congress eventually repealed the inclusion of sound recordings in the definition in the Work Made for Hire and Copyright Corrections Act of 2000. That's why, even though the amendment was reversed, it is still standard record company practice to consider sound recordings works made for hire because they qualify as either compilations or contributions to collective works. But what if they really aren't? What happens when that sound recording doesn't qualify as a work made for hire within one of those 9 categories? Remember in episode 10 when I discussed initial ownership, meaning whoever creates the work owns the work? Well, sound recordings as of 1972 were considered to be copyrightable original fixed expressions. So basically, whoever creates the sound recording owns the sound recording, unless they transfer it to somebody else or it qualifies as a work made for hire. But what if your sound recording does not qualify? What if you were commissioned to record one song, a single or a demo, which was never intended or never included as part of a compilation or a contribution to a collective work? That one song, that one sound recording would not qualify as a work made for hire because it would not fit into one of the 9 categories. Therefore, whoever created it, which is a little tricky because it's probably not just the artist. It would include the musicians, the background singers, the engineers, the producers as well, more on that later, would be the ones who owned it, not the record label. That's why record companies came up with this little trick to make sure that they control those master recordings for as long as possible. The language goes a little something like this, and this is language that they include in every agreement in addition to the work made for hire language. If for any reason the results and proceeds of artist services hereunder are determined at any time not to be a work made for hire, the artist hereby irrevocably transfers and assigns to label all right, title, and interest therein, including all copyrights, as well as all renewals and extensions thereto, which basically says, just in case your recording does not meet the requirements of a work made for hire, we own it anyway for the life of the copyright. So if Sophia wants to own and control her master recordings, entering into a standard recording agreement with a record label is not the way to do it. Why? Because every recording agreement I've seen is a work made for hire. Now, just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I'm sure there are plenty of independent labels that structure their deals in all sorts of ways, including sharing the ownership of the masters or offering the artist an opportunity to purchase the master after a period of years. But those types of deals are few and far between, and those labels don't usually have the bag or the money that all of you are so eager to get your hands on. So where it may be impossible to completely avoid a work made for hire agreement throughout the course of your career, you should at least be fully aware of what you're giving up when you sign one. All right, so what have we learned today? Well, in a nutshell, we talked about the 2 ways to create a work made for hire. The first being a work created by an employee within the scope of their employment, and the second being a specially ordered or commissioned work. A specially ordered or commissioned work by an independent contractor is considered a work made for hire if it satisfies all of the following 4, it's really 3, but I combined 2, criteria. Number 1, the work must fall within one of the 9 categories of works listed above that we just talked about, that are eligible to be specially ordered or commissioned as works for hire. There must be a written agreement between the party that ordered or commissioned the work and the individual or individuals who actually created the work. The agreement must be signed by all parties, and in the agreement, the parties must expressly agree that the work is to be considered a work made for hire, meaning the language work made for hire has to be in the contract. If a work fails to satisfy any of the requirements that I just listed, it is not a work made for hire. And if it doesn't qualify as a work made for hire, your contract will likely include the language of assignment, which serves almost the same purpose. Whew. That was a lot, and I know it was long, so you'll probably have to listen to this episode a couple of times. But work made for hire is a very prevalent concept in the music industry that you really need to understand before you sign a contract. And like I said, it may be impossible for you to avoid, in particular if you're a session singer or a session musician, or if you're trying to get a record deal. But at least know what you're signing and have an understanding of what you're giving up when you do. All right, that's all for this episode of the Bomb Podcast. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for joining me on the Bomb Podcast. If you were educated, empowered, or inspired by what you heard, please subscribe today to be the first to receive the latest episode. And don't forget, post a review, tell a friend, follow me on social media, and join my tribe at ProfessorButler.com.